Hi, I'm Jeff Lyons, and in this session of Storytalk, Therapy for Your Stories, we're talking with Amanda. And we're going to cover a bunch of topics, but we're really only talking about one thing, a very common problem or issue that almost all writers run into at some point. Frustration with their process, not knowing how to step or where to step, what comes next, how do I get productive? It's all about the same thing. So if you can relate to that, or are just really curious about how you get past that, take a listen. Okay, we have with us today Amanda. And what are we going to talk about today?
We're going to talk about my procrastination and
Ah,
difficulties writing, where I get stuck and I just will do anything except write. And I'll just worry about it and get upset.
so do you think this is the ubiquitous writer's block?
Yes and no. I've always seen writer's block as kind of a lack of ideas, but this is a kind of more, I think, nagging doubt that I'm just wasting my time. I'm just not good enough. I just can't evaluate my own work accurately. And I just avoid doing it.
What do you write?
At the moment, I'm writing a children's book, an MG.
I mean, are you all over the place in terms of genre? Do you write lots of different things?
Yeah, absolutely.
But is it long form prose more than like screenplays or something like that?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, okay. Have you published?
No. I mean, yeah, I was a journalist for years, but I've never published anything fictional.
Okay, so you have some serious chops then, because you
Yeah,
have to
you'd
know
think
how to
that'd make
write.
it easier, but it doesn't.
No, it's a different animal in some ways, but you
Yeah,
you you have to think like a writer to be a journalist. Okay,
yeah.
so tell me at what point in your process do you tip? Because I suspect there's a point at which you get productive and then you hit a wall,
Yeah.
right? Where in the process does that happen?
I think there are 2 points where it moves forward. And the first one is having the idea and feeling really excited about it. And the idea starts to formulate. In fairness, I don't plan out enough. And I'm not going to make that mistake next time. I'm starting with a log line and then building, building. And when I'm actually writing my first draft, it just whizzes out. It's so fun. It's so great. And then when I go back to try and kind of, what I'll tend to do is go over and over and over it, unstitching, restitching, building. And I get to a point where I just don't know if I'm actually improving it or I'm overdoing it and it's just getting worse and worse. I feel that I can't judge it.
So when you go back and start reworking, what are you reworking? Are you just moving words around, or are you doing something else?
That's really interesting. Often, what I'm doing and working on hard at the moment is clarity. So I think I'm getting the words down so fast, I'm not remembering that other people will not necessarily clue into what I'm talking about.
So you're wordsmithing more than anything else.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Okay, okay. Here, you said you dropped a couple of little bombs here, which really make my intuition about your initial question. I think I'm right about where you need to go and what you need to do to really bust this over time. And this is very bustable. I'm glad that you have a yes no answer to the writer's block question, because writer's block for me is it's a very serious thing because people buy into it and they identify with it, and anytime they get to a point where they get stuck with their writing, it's writer's block. Well, no, not necessarily. Because for me, writer's block is 99.9% smoke. There's only 1% of it, 0.1% of it, that I think is legitimate, which is someone is so clogged creatively they can't make creative choice. And so they just kind of freeze. Or the other version of this is they don't know what they don't know when it comes to writing craft. So they do what everybody does. Writers write. Just write. Their story will write itself. It'll all work it out. If you've got something good, it will work itself out in the writing. So just write, right? It's the number one creative writing myth, in my opinion. It's simply not true. Writers, stories do not write themselves. Characters do not write themselves. You are the writer. You write them. And when you don't write, it doesn't get done, okay? So, but when you don't know what else there is to do, you just do what everybody does, which is a natural reaction. It's a knee jerk. You just write, okay? So you wordsmith, okay? In my gut instinct about this for you is that you just need some more craft skill from the standpoint of having a process that you can fall back on to know what to really work on. Okay. So and this is why I wanted to talk to you, because as soon as we started, communicating, I knew that this thing I have called the writer workflow is something that would be very beneficial for you. And it is a process that has developed over the years. I didn't really realize it until recently, like a year ago, that I have been taking all of my students and all of my clients through the same basic steps of premise development, logline, premise development, logline development, short synopsis writing, blah, blah, blah. There's like 10 steps that everybody at one time or another ends up doing. And by the time they get to those steps, they know their structure and they know their narrative design inside and out. And then they can start pages with lots of confidence. It doesn't mean you're not going to get stuck. Getting stuck in your writing process is normal. I've gotten stuck, and I've been stuck on things for weeks and weeks and weeks sometimes. But your subconscious mind and your conscious writing mind have to get in sync over time sometimes, and it just takes time. But if it's a writing-related block, quote unquote, the only solution is a writing solution. It's not, bath bubble beads and flavored coffees, or a yoga class. No, you need to get down and look. And I talk about this in my little ebook on writer's block. You've got to start applying story process, development processes to your writing. So so how does that sound to you? Does that make sense?
That sounds to me like what you're saying in essence is plan.
Yes.
Which is what I tell all my students, because I teach English, and I don't do it. I'm the worst hypocrite at that. And I would agree that this is why I think I'm getting really stuck in my writing day to day. Yeah, I'm learning craft, I'm learning skill, but I still don't have this story really clear in my own mind. So
there you go. That's it. This is it. And this is the black hole of creative writing. This isn't taught in MFA programs. It's not taught in the famous writing schools, like the Iowa, it just, nobody talks about story development as a legitimate, like they'll talk about outlining and stuff like that, but it's more involved. Finding that
I think
more.
for me as well, that on this book as example, I'm using it to try and craft and hone my skills, but there's that nagging doubt all the time that I do not have an original idea. So no matter how good my writing is, they're going to reject it, or it's not going to fit. It's pretty fine, but it's not going to fit the trend at the moment. So the agents are just not going to like it.
Yes.
And so I'm totally wasting my time.
Yeah, and I don't want to use these sessions that I do with folks, for Storytalk, to plug my stuff necessarily, even though I'm going to. I mean, it is my podcast, right? But that's exactly why I wrote Anatomy of a Premise Line. Yeah. Because I don't know if you're familiar with that book or not, but.
No. But okay. I did watch your podcast on log lines a while ago and the one last night.
Oh,
And it
excellent,
really kind
excellent,
of sparked me, which is why I wanted to participate in this with you.
excellent, excellent.
Because to me,
Because
that seemed a way in which you can set up something that's going to work before you go away and spend years of your life writing something which you
exactly,
increasingly doubt.
thank you. Exactly. You know, I mean, so many people, they get all fired up about their story idea, you know, and it's like, okay, I'm going to spend the next 2 years of my life writing
Yeah,
this thing. You know, really? Really? How do you
yeah,
know? How do you know that? You know? And that's what Anatomy of a Premise Line is all about, is to teach you a very grounded process to assess your idea before you write pages about whether or not it's going to have any legs. And when you get through that process and you get to the end of it, you get a premise line. It's not a log line, it's a premise line, very different thing. It's the entire structure of your story in just a couple of sentences. It's very hard to do. I mean, I literally wrote the book on it, right? But it takes
yeah,
me 8 weeks, 9 weeks to get a decent premise line. But
yeah,
that is time so well spent because once you get to the
absolutely.
end of it, you know you're gonna have some legs.
Yeah,
Okay. But so I highly recommend learning basic story structure concepts and then applying those to your idea and then figuring out the structure of the story. Because once you know you've got that in place, and I'm gonna be putting up videos on my YouTube channel about this process. So keep an eye out on that because I'm gonna really start putting up more and more videos to give people examples of how to actually apply these ideas, you know, without coming and hiring me as a consultant. There'll be a lot of opportunity to learn off that YouTube channel. But that's the starting point, you know. Then the rest of the good news is there are a bunch of other steps, and after we're done with this call, I'm going to share with you some of these tools, and I'll give you some of these so that you can
thank
get
you.
get a bit of a strategy for moving forward because
Yeah,
this is very fixable. You just have to start learning the basic craft steps, which take time. I mean, like learning any skill, it takes a little doing, right? But if you're a writer and you've got lots of stories, you've got lots of things to apply these things to. Okay,
yeah,
so let me just tell you what the basic process is that I take people through so that when they get to the end, they, with great confidence, can start pages and know they've got something that's going to work. Doesn't mean an agent's going to love their book, but they can have confidence it's going to be solid. You got selling your book and writing it are two different problems.
yeah,
You know, so it starts off with the premise development process. Okay, so you get the entire structure of your story figured out, and then you know you've got something that's really going to work. Then you take that and you blow that out into a short synopsis of about 6 or 8 pages. Okay, the premise line is made up of 4 clauses, like any sentence, right? It has clauses. There's 4 clauses that make up a premise line. Each of those clauses can get blown out into 2 or 3 pages each. So now you've got to start creating some connective tissue, you know, and figuring out how to get the narrative flowing a little bit. But you've got in that premise line, you've got all the story structure beats that you need that are core foundational to make any story work. Okay. So, but you're only dealing in the premise line with your A-line story, your main storyline. The hardest thing about assessing your work, and everybody does this, is they get all wrapped up in the minutia of all the subplots and the supporting characters and this is happening and that's happening, and they don't know the forest for the trees. So
yeah,
part of the learning process here is learning how to recognize what's essential and what isn't. Now, all the stuff in your story is important. It's got to be there. But at this stage, you want to be able to just pull out the thread that's the through line of the whole book. Okay? And once you blow that premise line out into the short synopsis, then now you're writing a children's book, so it's not going to be this complicated. It's going to be much
yeah,
simpler. But if you're writing an adult novel or YA novel or something like that, then you start. There's a whole tool which I'll share with you how you develop subplots. Because in a novel or a screenplay, you can't just be talking about the mainline story all the time. People need a break, right? Well, what do you break away to? Well, you break away to subplots. But there's a lot of confusion about subplots, about what those are and how to use them. This little tool I'm going to give you will help you figure out at least what one or two main subplots are. Then once you have those figured out, which takes time, then you take that and the short synopsis and you weave those subplots into that short synopsis.
Okay.
And then you blow that out into 10, 15 more pages. Because for a lot of publishers and agents and editors, they will ask you as a deliverable, they will want a long synopsis. Or they'll say, give me, chapter summaries sometimes. But a lot of people want an actual synopsis. And in the back of Anatomy of a Premise Line, my friend Caroline Levitt, who's a New York Times bestselling author, was willing to give me one of her synopses that she used to sell one of her books. So there's one of her long synopses in the back of the book, which is a great example of how to attack this problem. But it weaves in the main line, and it weaves in all those subplots that she uses. And then you've got this, 30-page deliverable that tells you how to, what the story is, and it's really going to work. Then you take that, and I will also share this with you, you break that out into a tool that I have for planning your chapters. And so you can plan all your chapters and know exactly how your books, it doesn't mean it's not going to change, but by this stage, you're going to be so solid with your basic story that now you can start building out your individual chapters, seeing how you're going to get in and out of what voices you're going to be in, if you're doing third person omniscient or if it's a first person, and then you design your chapter flow. Now, at that point, you can jump in and just start writing your darn book. Or there's another step after that, which is just like storyboarding it, which, screenwriters use all the time. It's a very powerful tool. You probably know about it. You throw your chapters up on a wall on sticky notes or corkboard with, file cards. And you have each chapter as a bullet, like a slug line and a couple of sentences. And then you move those around over time, and like a month. I have a friend who does this, and he puts it out on the top of his massive marble cooktop, and he just, for like a month, he just moves these cards around and gets all the pacing right. And so he color codes each of the POV characters, so you can see where you're bunching up, and you can see where you're. And I talk about this in my workflow stuff. But you don't have to do that.
That's it physically on like a corkboard or something rather than on your computer screen.
Right, exactly. And Scrivener and some other programs have corkboard built in, and you can do cards. So after all these steps, basically what I'm saying is that what all of these steps afford you is a strategy and method so that you don't ever have to get stuck. There's always something to do that's related to story structure and narrative design that's craft focused, that helps you get over these humps of just thinking massaging the language is going to be somehow, make it work. No, there's probably structure issues here that have to be figured out. Who's the opponent? What's the moral problem of your character? What's the midpoint complication? Do you have one? Is there a doom moment? Is there a all these classic steps. If you don't have them, you're going to be lost in the story woods.
Yeah.
So that's why I wanted you to come on the show, because you're dealing with an archetypal problem that everybody who doesn't know what they don't know experiences. And it's so fixable.
Yeah, and I'm going backwards. I've kind of written the draft, and now I'm trying to work out what the story is.
Well, you just said the magic words. In the Anatomy of a Premise Line, I talk about that. I call it backing into your story. You write, you get hundreds of pages of script, and then the wheels come off the cart, and everybody goes, what the heck happened? And everyone does the same thing. They follow the breadcrumbs backward.
Yeah.
And everyone ends up in the exact same place. The premise.
What's really interesting about what you're saying is that, ultimately, obviously, if one's dreams came true, your book would get published, get made to a movie or TV series. If you think of starting it as a movie or a TV series and work backwards to writing it as a book, it kind of works, because the way you're describing it, that's how I would think I would plan a script for a TV show, not a book. A book
Well,
I just sit and write, don't I?
that's a really interesting thing you just said, because
Yeah.
I mean, I'm doing it myself. I have friends who are. I'm mostly a screenwriter, and I have friends who are screenwriters, and it's so hard to sell a script that a lot of screenwriters are now taking their scripts that they've had in their drawers for years, and they're adapting them into novels and short stories and novellas, and creating IP for themselves that then get picked up by producers because it's based on IP. And they've already got the script written, So a lot of screenwriters are doing that exact strategy to get their stuff made, But it's absolutely another road in. If you have a natural propensity for that kind of writing, yeah, of course. It's a whole different animal. Screenwriting is a whole different challenge. But if you can make that transition from the script to the novel, it's absolutely worth doing. So you're adding a whole other year or more onto the writing process. But absolutely, that's a strategy, and people are doing it all the time now. Yeah. So, how do you feel about all this?
Yeah, I mean, that's what excited me when I first saw you in a podcast about log lines, was I felt, I think the difficulty is that I am writing for fun, but I want to get published. And how do I get to that? It's an enormous amount of work if from the very first moment the whole idea was flawed. And it
Yes.
seems to me that going through this planning,
Yes.
I'm going to see that far more clearly and be able to adapt to make sure the
Yes.
idea is solid before we go and waste years of writing time.
Exactly. I don't ever give guarantees because
Yeah, sure.
but I can assure you that if you really hunker down and learn this process, you will know that you've got something that's going to work. But be warned that part of this process is also weeding out the stories that aren't going to work.
Now there you see, because when I've got probably about 10 log lines at the minute, all different genres, all over the place, and I have no idea which one to do next.
Yeah. Do your premise lines. That will tell you. And the one that has the most juice is going to jump out and grab you by the throat as soon as you start getting into that stuff.
Yeah, that's brilliant, because I'm just sort of walking around thinking. I'm procrastinating, I'm thinking all the time about writing.
Of course.
And I'm imagining, is that sort of some brilliant light's going to switch on you, or it's that story, not that one. But it doesn't. I think it's why a lot of writers, myself, jump from idea to idea.
Yeah. You just you need the next step to get into the next level of depth with something to know how to assess it objectively, as objectively as you can, since it's your story. But the premise line process is absolutely will do that for you. Okay, so I highly recommend you, whether you do my stuff or not, it doesn't matter. Find something that affords you a structural approach to your idea, where you're going to start pulling it apart structurally to see what's there. And the key is your protagonist, to make sure that they have a strong, what I call moral component. Okay, it's that moral blind spot that's driving their behavior. So they're the ones that are driving the story proactively, and not a leaf on the wind being pushed by events, which I call a situation, versus a story, which is a very active protagonist who's creating their own problems because they don't know they've got a problem. So that's a whole other conversation. So that's my advice to you, and I think this is a very fixable problem. I think it's just craft skill set evolution on your part, in terms of going to the next level as a craftsperson, as a writer, which is any skill can be learned. So this is a very learnable craft skill, and it's an invaluable one. So that's my advice to you, and I'm happy to share some of these tools with you after we're off here, and answer any questions you might have, because there's no reason for you to be tortured about this and to be stuck in the mud forever. No necessity for that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's exciting. Thank you.
Yeah, as long as you don't feel like you just bought a used car.
No.
Okay, good.
Not getting that metaphor at all.
Okay, good. All right, then there we go. We've given you some light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not an oncoming train.
Sure.
Okay, then let's end this, and I'll be in
You.
touch afterward. Okay.
Super. Yeah. Thank you.
Let me